The Secrets of Doctor Who is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, episode 178.
One day, I shall come back.
That's it. I've been renewed.
Is when a Time Lord's body wears out, he regenerates.
I'm a Time Lord. I'm not a human being. I walk in eternity.
Braveheart.
Change, my dear, and it seems on a moment too soon.
Unlimited rice pudding.
Physician healers. Wearing a bit thin. Fantastic.
I am Scottish. I can complain about things.
Ta-da! Ooh. Should be fine.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series Doctor Who. And today we're taking a look back at the Russell T Davies era of modern Doctor Who, and as well as we're discussing the 10th Doctor's run of seasons as the Doctor. Joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Cory Sticha. Hi, Father Cory.
How's it going?
Very well, thanks. Folks, if you can, we really do appreciate it when you can go and write a review at Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast from, including we just heard from a listener who went to Stitcher and wrote a review, which is great. If you can write a review for us, that really gets the podcast in front of more folks and helps grow the audience. And also, when you share the podcast with your friends, so your Doctor Who loving friends, that really, and even those who might want to love Doctor Who, and they don't know yet, then that really helps us grow the podcast and better show for everyone. So, like I said, we're talking about the Russell T Davies era. And just as a little explanation, Russell T Davies was the showrunner for Doctor Who from its revival in March of 2005 until he handed over the reins to Stephen Moffat after the end of the
10th Doctor's time.
In July of 2008, yes. So he really was the one who revived Doctor Who after it had been off the air for so many years. And so that's one of the things we want to talk about here is, Russell T Davies' contribution to Doctor Who, all of Doctor Who over the decades and decades. It's a unique contribution because it was not a foregone conclusion that Doctor Who would come back, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, it had been rumored even from, right after it was canceled or put on hiatus in 89. But other than the 8th Doctor movie, which you've already talked about, there really was nothing. And actually, I recall right after the movie, and everybody was really not very happy with the movie, that pretty much the assumption was, well, that's it. It's dead. The series is never coming back. And then all of a sudden there's rumors, about 2003, 2004. It is coming back. There is something new being done.
There were rumors periodically during the Long Dark that Doctor Who would be back, and there were even various actors who had rumored to have been cast, and none of those ended up working out until Russell Davies, and some people had kind of gotten despairing of, oh, here comes another rumor, we've heard this before. So it's not like there was no interest in reviving the show, but it and the BBC even did an animated revival called Scream of the Shalka, which I know we're going to review at some point, which had a different version of the 9th Doctor, but then Russell T Davies' version got on the air, and that was basically forgotten. One of the things that we should mention about Russell T Davies, now you don't just revive a series like this unless you're a fan. So Russell T Davies had been a fan. You also don't revive a series like this unless you're already a writer-producer guy, and he had written and produced other things. He also was one of the gang that contributed to Doctor Who spin-off media during the Long Dark. So Russell Davies and Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss and people like that, who became bigger names later on, all did things like write Doctor Who novels and write Doctor Who short stories that got published and write scripts for Big Finish and things like that. So that was really kind of the spin-off media was the seedbed for the people who then made the move to making it for television again.
Yeah, I mean that's actually a really good point. Is a lot of that stuff, the Big Finish stuff, the novels, the other materials, the people involved in those really are the people who made New Who what it is. I mean, all those, a lot of the writers, more than just the showrunners, a lot of the writers and other people involved. So that's actually a really good point. It didn't just come out of nowhere. And like you said, Russell T Davies had a very strong career in British TV before Doctor Who, and he had a lot of big shows that he had done before that he'd been involved with. So and he's done things since, obviously. So he wasn't just a out of nowhere sort of guy. And so just to kind of close the loop, his time with the show, with actively airing episodes, because of course there was a lot of pre-production, but really 2005 to 2010, that was his 5-year era, which is, for most TV shows, that's a full run. that's a real full
if you're
run.
lucky.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the amazing things, and it really shows to Russell T Davies to set the platform where we're 15 years. I mean, it's 15 years since Doctor Who released, and it is still considered a current series. Now, admittedly, it's between seasons right now,
right?
But it is still a currently being developed series, and so many TV series that were loved, but they kind of came and went within 5 years, 10 years if they're really lucky. So this is pretty incredible.
So he really kind of set the stage. He built the foundation for New Who. I mean, it could have been a one season and then gone again sort of thing, but he really kind of recast the foundation for Doctor Who. The New Who is different, and it's connected. It's got a lot, a lot of things are connected, but there are some new things as well. And I wonder, like, what it is that really contributes to the longevity of New Who, the unique contributions he made. Anything that come to mind for?
Well, I think the first thing I think of, and we've mentioned it before, is that when you look at Rose, the first episode out of the gate, it's not an homage to classic Who.
Mm-hmm.
It sets the bare basic groundwork to say this is Doctor Who, because you got the TARDIS, you got the Doctor, and that's really about it. Autons, but those were pretty minor bad guys to begin with. But it sets the groundwork and then starts to build the backstory in slowly. It's not like, and I think that's one of the critiques against the movie, is it tried to throw so much of the backstory in right off the bat. And anybody who was kind of a casual, might be interested in this show, got blown out.
Right.
And I think that's the first thing is, New Who started very gradually while going its own path on the same time. It's not like it said, well, we're going to start out and then we're going to jump back and pull all this stuff in, and then we're going to kind of move forward. It's kind of doing both at the same time, where it kind of builds its own audience, it builds its own mythos while pulling in the canon of classic Who,
right,
as it goes along.
Right. We didn't get the Dalek, even the classic Doctor Who villain, until the 6th episode of the first season. They waited. I think that's actually a key point, is they made it accessible to non-fans. They made a really good entry point for someone to come in, which is what I was. I was not a classic Who fan when I first started watching, and given that the first season was a bit uneven, we'll talk about some of those uneven episodes when we list our the best and worst. But it was an entry point. There was a way for non-fans to come in and to relate, and that it was modern in style as well for 2005, and continues to be so in style with even the newer seasons. Jimmy, what about you? What do you think of the unique contribution?
One of the things we talked about when we reviewed the 1996 TV movie is how it feels like a hybrid between classic Who and New Who. It has elements of both. And I think they've talked about how basically they learned lessons from that movie. One of the things that Father Cory was alluding to is the fact that the 96 movie requires you to immediately come up to speed on who the Daleks are, who the Master is, and how regeneration works. And we've got Sylvester McCoy for the first, basically third of the movie before suddenly we have a regeneration, and then we're in a regeneration crisis for most of the rest of the movie. And it just was all too much to build a new audience with. And so they start with a doctor who's apparently recently regenerated because he looks at himself in a mirror and is like examining his ears and stuff. So he's apparently recently regenerated, but they don't talk about that. So we don't have to spend time on that. If you're a fan of the classic series, you'll pick up on it, that this is a new body for him. But otherwise, you don't have to worry about it. It just goes past you if you're a new fan, because they needed to build a new audience. The people who had been children in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s were now middle-aged or better. And so since this is a family show, you need to bring in those new people. And that means you can't be information heavy. One of the classic problems that sequel series have is, how do we differentiate ourselves from our predecessor while also honoring the predecessor's legacy? This was one of the things that early on, for example, Next Generation, I don't think got right. They came back and said, okay, we're going to be our own series now. We can't have allusions to things from Star Trek, the original series. We're going to have Dr. McCoy in the first episode, and that's it. And then we can't do things. And it took a long time to get like the Romulans pulled in and things like that, and to have time travel stories again. And they really were shy and bringing in other references. Doctor Who, I think, in its revived series did much better, because we did get a Dalek in the first season, halfway through. You don't want to go immediately to the Daleks, because once you go to the Daleks, where do you have to go next? You don't start at your top. And then Russell T Davies cleverly structured it to where we only meet a single Dalek. Right. And we don't get mass Daleks until later on. So we have this steadily rising season-long story arc. And that's something that was also new, that was a Russell T Davies contribution, these season-long story arcs, with Bad Wolf being the first one. It's a way to thread the individual stories together without making it a modern serialized, 10-hour movie or 13-hour movie. So you can have independent standalone episodes that have a running thread through them. And that kind of replaces the old serials. In the old serials, we'd have, 4 or 6 parts on the same story, and they'd be in half-hour chunks typically, and you'd have to wait weeks to get resolution, and then we'd be off to something completely different. Russell T Davies said, okay, we're going to do 45-minute episodes, but we're going to tell self-contained stories in those for the most part. Only occasionally are we going to have cliffhangers, but we will still have some running thread that ends up getting pulled at the end of the series. We also had a dramatic upgrade in the production values. We had a dramatic upgrade in the pace and the timing of the episodes. We had more overt humor. We had more overt action. And in general, just a higher tempo of development. This is one of the things that can be off-putting for fans of New who then try to get into Classic Who. It can seem like endless running around corridors without the plot moving forward. Yes. When it's at its worst. And so this was a big step up in those ways. Also, something that really wasn't a Russell T Davies innovation, but because people kind of forgot about the 96 movie, it got perceived that way. We have romance for the first time with the Doctor involved. We have clear romantic tension between him and Rose, and then it gets even stronger in the David Tennant era, and then we have Martha for the rebound, and finally Donna for friendship. And so this was never a question in Classic Who, other than like when the Doctor accidentally gets engaged to Kamika in the Aztecs episode.
Father Cory?
One thing I do think kind of contributed to wasn't Russell T Davies' intention, but I think it actually worked out the best, was the fact that Christopher Eccleston was a one-season Doctor. And then you had David Tennant. And we'll talk much more about this kind of going forward, because that's the whole purpose of this episode. But I think that actually worked out best, where instead of having, Christopher Eccleston coming on and, staying on for several seasons, you had that change right away into a very popular character.
Right.
Popular actor, popular Doctor. And I think that's what really cemented the the long-term viability of the series.
Yeah, Christopher Eccleston was popular with some people, but David Tennant was clearly much more popular. And Matt Smith was also popular. And even though you can say, well, okay, when the ratings started to slip under Capaldi, it was, because the show had been on the air so long and stuff. Okay, maybe. But I think the likability of the Doctor is a big factor in the popularity of a given era. If I find myself thinking about, I'm going to watch some new Who, what era do I want to watch?
Right.
It's going to be, I'm immediately attracted to watching Matt Smith or David Tennant because they are the most likable of the new Who Doctors. I mean, Christopher Eccleston, Peter Capaldi, for me, Jodie Whittaker, boring as a doctor. The interesting, bouncy, exciting, friendly ones are Tennant and Matt Smith. And I'm immediately, it's like, I'm up for watching that in a way I'm not necessarily up for watching the others. I can appreciate the other doctors. I can appreciate Jodie Whittaker. I can appreciate Peter Capaldi. I can appreciate Christopher Eccleston. And they have good episodes in their individual runs. But the likability of the Doctor, for me, is a big factor.
A related element, too, is the introduction of the concept of regeneration really at the beginning, at the end of that first season, which is such a key element in the Doctor Who mythos. So getting that out there, if we had gone 3 or 4 seasons with Christopher Eccleston and then had a regeneration, I think that might have put some fans off. Like, what are we doing here? Why are we doing this? Perhaps.
I don't know. I think fans were really, because fans... even new fans would know fans of the classic series, like the kids who were watching it with their parents. The parents would explain regeneration to them and kind of prep them for, typically we have, about 3 years for a Doctor. Yeah. And it was a big surprise. And I know a lot of fans, because I was watching at the time, a lot of fans were like, wait, what? We have never had a 1-season Doctor before. We get 13 episodes of this guy and that's it? His character arc is just beginning. And this was not planned. So I think actually, even though I think we definitely traded up, this was something that people had concerns about it because this was unprecedented. It's like, what happened here that we only get a 1-season Doctor? And the BBC kind of sort of lied about it and implied that was the plan, but it wasn't.
Clearly, Christopher Eccleston later said he didn't leave under good circumstances. But again, I think that actually was a positive because it kind of even the longtime fans were sort of surprised by it, and it turned out well. So in that sense, it's positive.
I do think if it had turned out badly, if let's just say they had Peter Capaldi as the next Doctor, I don't think we'd be talking about New Who today.
Right.
I think, and we're going to talk more about David Tennant and all that, but I think he really cemented the New Who.
Right.
Yeah.
One other thing I want to mention that you mentioned, Father Cory, but like with the Daleks being that first season, and if you look at it, they were very deliberate in how they reintroduced major elements from Classic Who. First season was the Daleks. Second season was the Cybermen. Third season was the Master. I mean, these are 3 of the biggest elements, the antagonists for the Doctor from Classic Who, and they were very deliberate in not. Like it could have been very tempting to just roll them all out in the first season, but they were very deliberate in how they did it.
They also were measured in how they filled in the backstory. Initially, we didn't know all about the Time War and stuff, and we didn't know the Doctor had killed everybody, and we got little drips and drabs of that as it went along. And then at the end of the David Tennant specials, which you could think of as the 5th season, that's when we actually get to see Gallifrey for the first time. So the Time Lords don't come back in until then.
Right.
With Timothy Dalton as the Lord President, which is awesome.
Rassilon.
Rassilon. Yes, that was good. All right, so let's talk about the 2 Doctors and 3 companions of the Russell T Davies era. We've kind of been talking about Christopher Eccleston and David Tennant, but there is that point you made, I think it was you, Father Cory, who made the point that David Tennant really cemented the Doctor Who was back. Like he really cemented what we expect of a modern Doctor Who Doctor. in those expectations, for good or for ill. In other words, I think are often compared against the David Tennant Doctor as opposed to the Christopher Eccleston Doctor.
Well, and I remember when David Tennant was the Doctor, and of course everybody compared him to Patrick Troughton, kind of the clown doctor, with kind of the creative mind, but very, very, clownish and attitude and everything. And, it was interesting, in preparing for this, I went back and looked at the Ranking the Doctors episode we did, went back and looked at my list, Christopher Eccleston I put on the low end and David Tennant I put on the higher end. And it really, and that, I think that really was the dramatic difference there. I would like to have seen more Christopher Eccleston, because maybe he would have, his character dealt like Peter Capaldi did. Peter Capaldi came out very harsh, very aggressive with the tack eyebrows, and he mellowed. And he actually became, I personally enjoy like the Nardole episodes and things like that with Peter Capaldi, because by that time he'd mellowed quite a bit. And I think that might have happened with Christopher Eccleston's Doctor, that they were able to move that development instead into David Tennant era.
Yeah, I agree. I think that that was the natural progression for his Doctor, because he's just come out of the Time War. He's hurting, he's angry, and over time he'll learn to deal with that.
Exactly.
In terms of comparing the new Doctors to the classic Doctors, I've seen different people compare Christopher Eccleston's Doctor to John Pertwee's and also Tom Baker in aspects. Now, clearly, he's a very different person than either one of those guys. But like Pertwee, he and to some extent like Baker, he could be very brusque and kind of angry and condescending. And then I've seen David Tennant compared not just to the second Doctor with the clownishness, but also to Peter Davison's Doctor, the young, handsome Doctor who's, I've seen some people, for female viewers, call him your good boyfriend.
Right.
And he does come across to me as he's a lot like a modern Peter Davison, because he's got the angry bit, he can get snappish, but he's also got the boyishness. And then the one that I think of as the most Patrick Troughton-like is not in this era. It's Matt Smith. He's the zany one.
Right. We should mention the Christopher Eccleston's departure. We kind of briefly alluded to it, but he left under a cloud. I mean, as was later come out, and he revealed very recently, in fact, and others have talked about, he had big differences with Russell T Davies and other showrunners, perhaps the BBC's. Things have been said like, oh, he didn't like how certain members of the cast and crew were treated, perhaps. Others said it had to do with the tone of the show, that he wanted it to be more aimed at kids, lighter, a little more comedy, and he felt like it was going too dark. So whatever it was, he ended up leaving. And if that's the case, it's kind of interesting, because David Tennant's era was actually, in many cases, a lot lighter. That first season, there were moments where it felt kind of heavy, and the Doctor felt kind of dark. And they did go lighter with David Tennant, I think.
Mm-hmm. They did. From what I've seen, from what Eccleston has said, basically there were like three high up people, and he hasn't, at least in what I've seen, he hasn't specifically named who they were,
right? But
that he had significant differences with, and ended up leaving. And I'm not entirely clear to what extent was it you're fired or you can't fire me, I quit.
Right. That's still, a bit unknown at this point.
And I wonder if it's people who are still involved in one way or another with the show, because he's very clear he does not want to come back for anything. I mean, that's why we had the War Doctor in the 50th anniversary special. He was not willing to come back. So and maybe Russell T Davies was one of them. Maybe he's not. Maybe it was one of the other people involved. Maybe it's the BBC in general. I mean, I don't know if he's done work with the BBC since. I haven't followed his career, so I don't know. But
actually, my understanding is it hurt his career.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know that the people are involved, but I think that's one of the reasons he's reticent, because if you have a star who does too much trash talking of execs, it's going to make future execs who are considering hiring him reconsider whether they want to hire him, because he could trash talk you one day.
Right.
Temperamental artists can be like that. Also, I think I've heard him allude to personal problems he was having at the time, some psychiatric difficulties, and other people in the cast where Billy Piper was going through a divorce at the time. And so there was, some off-screen angst that was affecting it. And apparently it's just a dark period in his life that he doesn't want to revisit.
So we'll talk about the 10th Doctor at length, actually, a little bit later. But I want to talk about the three companions that we had in this era. We have, as mentioned, Billy Pepper. So Rose, Martha Jones, and Donna. Three one-off companions. Mickey kind of tagged along at times, but I wouldn't necessarily call him a regular. He was there for a few episodes as a companion. But really, there was three.
Major companions.
This was a solo companion era, basically. The Doctor and a female companion, and each one was somewhat different. Your Rose, who she definitely became the romantic interest. Martha Jones, the wannabe romantic interest, and then Donna, the totally not romantically interested. And and it's a very, very interesting that they had these. They clearly wanted to have these different kinds of companions with a Doctor. And as we've gone through this era, episode by episode, I've really kind of come around to thinking, I think Donna is one of my favorite companions. It may change as we get into the Moffat era, and I'm like, I really like Amy and Rory and Clara. But right now, I think Donna is the strongest of these three companions.
I think Donna is still the best companion of New Who. I will say that flat out. As much as I enjoyed, Rory and Amy and Nardole and Graham today, I still think Donna is the best. If nothing else, because she gave it back to the Doctor as good as he would give it.
She's definitely the best companion of the Russell T Davies era. I'd have to think about whether I'm not closed to saying she's the best of New Who, but she's definitely the best of the Russell T Davies era. I just want to think about it a little more if it's broader than that. I actually like the arc they have between these three companions, because it does it's Hegelian. You have this thesis, antithesis, synthesis. You have the thesis of the romantic companion, the antithesis of the companion who wants to be romantic but isn't, and then you have the synthesis of friendship. And that's a well-planned arc. Now, I don't think they handled it perfectly in all places. Sometimes Martha's pining is a little too much, but at least she finally stands up for herself and leaves on her own terms. I'm out of here. This isn't good for me. Been nice, but see you later. I like all three of the companions. I probably like, actually, even though she was very popular at the time, I probably like Rose the least as a person. Rose comes across as flirty, whiny, and not as serious a human being as Martha or Donna. I can relate to Martha and I can relate to Donna in a way that I can't relate to Rose, because she's a vapid post-teenager.
Right.
Also, one change we should mention, this was another Russell T Davies contribution to the show. These people have families that are also important to the show. The closest we got to that in Classic Who was Tegan's Auntie Vanessa, or occasional mentions to relatives we never saw. But here we have fully rounded out families with their own personality. We meet Rose's family, we meet Martha's family, who are largely forgettable, and we meet Donna's family.
Yes.
And that's another big contribution to the show that made it more complex and more realistic.
And, I want to say, talking about Rose, and I agree with your, especially at the very beginning, she's very much that stereotypical bubbly millennial, quote unquote, personality. But I think she's probably got one of the best developments as a companion, because eventually she becomes much more serious, much more structured. Her life, she becomes a fighter, basically.
Right.
Yeah, and she's got the longest arc. She's there for 2 seasons instead of just 1, because they wanted her to provide continuity. But when Christopher Eccleston left,
and then comes in later as well.
Yeah. Although I'd say Mickey has the furthest development of anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that I like about these companions is, and this is another change in how the show is approached, it's character driven now.
Yeah.
In a way that it wasn't before. I mean, yeah, they did want the companions to have personalities, and some of the companions were successful, but they didn't have the arcs of character development that Rose and Martha and Donna each get. This is now, before you could have companions written out of the show at a moment's notice, and there wasn't like an arc leading to how they join the Doctor and how they progress with the Doctor and then how they leave the Doctor. And now we have that happening. For all three of the characters, they are not the same person exactly when they meet the Doctor. They change over their time, and then there's thought put into how they leave, and it's built up. So, we have the Rose supernova thing, and we have Martha standing up for herself, and we have Donna's mind catch on fire, and all of these are dramatic moments that the show builds to. So now the character development is driving the plot in a way that it did not in Classic Who, when it was much more high concept rather than high character.
I would argue, though, that Classic Who was moving that way.
Yes.
Look at Ace's character.
I was going to cite Ace, yes.
Because, and of course we know now the Carmel master plan, that was supposed to be kind of what it was going to be. Ace was going to develop throughout the course of these as the Doctor himself developed in his mystery.
Right.
Ace
was going to go off to the Time Lord Academy and become a Time Lady.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting that is something that they actually started considering at the last couple of seasons of Classic Who that then got picked up with New Who.
And New Who borrowed from that. Rose is basically a 21st century version of Ace.
Yeah. That's true. So let's move on to talking about this, the fun thing that is, I don't know if it's meaningless, but I have fun doing it. I want to rank our top 5 episodes from the Russell T Davies era, and then our worst 5. And I'm not sure how we're going to do this. If you just want to name them, or if we want to go one by one, our top, and then all together our second. Do you want to just name them?
Let's do it person by person.
Okay. I will defer to you both first, and Father Cory, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so I had to put one Christopher Eccleston episode in. I had to make sure there was one there, and so I picked the final two-parter, Bad Wolf, Parting of the Ways.
Okay,
because I really feel that was, of course, the final episodes was the strongest one of his run. I'm purposely actually leaving off 2 particular best episodes because I know they're going to come up on your guys' list as well.
Okay. All right.
So I'll mention them as honorable mentions. And of course, that's Blink and Midnight.
Okay.
Those are honorable mentions. School Reunion. I love of course, that was the first real heavy, we're bringing back Classic Who in Sarah Jane Smith.
Yep.
Rise of the Cybermen, Age of Steel, the introduction of the Cybermen in the alternate universe. Then the 3-parter, Utopia, Sound of Drums, Last of the Time Lords, reintroducing the Master. And then one episode, I don't remember what our kind of architects was, but I liked it, was Turn Left. Where it was the alternate history for Donna. That was, again, one of those that I really actually kind of enjoyed. And mainly because I like the idea of it and kind of how it was played out.
Yeah. I should mention that we considered 2-parters and the 3-parter as one story for the purposes of this.
Dom made us do that.
Yes, I did.
And I also forgot to mention that with that 3-parter, it was the first episode, especially with Derek Jacobi as the master for that brief time. That was so great. But I like the whole 3-parter.
I liked your choice of Turn Left. It didn't make my list, but I do like your choice of that. That would have been in my top 10, certainly. Jimmy, what's your top 5?
So I had an easy time coming up with 3 of the 5, and then I had a much harder time. For me, there are 3 stories that really stand out in the Russell T Davies as awesome. Blink, the introduction of the Weeping Angels. Silence in the Library, Forest of the Dead, the Vashta Nerada and the introduction of her song. And Midnight, the episode set on the space bus with the creature we never see. Those 3 stories are all awesome. after that, it gets a lot harder. There's, I think, a significant gap for me, and it's harder to pick the final 2 slots in the top 5. And by the way, these are not in any order. Those are just my top 3.
Mm-hmm.
The things I've considered for the final 2 slots include Time Crash, the 5-minute 4th Doctor meets 10th Doctor, just because it's so much fun.
Jimmy's breaking the rules again. Okay, I'll allow it.
Possibly The Empty Child / The Doctor Dances, which was from the Christopher Eccleston era. It's the only thing from that era that I would put on this list. Possibly Human Nature / Family of Blood, and possibly School Reunion.
Okay.
But it's much harder for me to fill those latter slots. And one thing I notice about the ones I picked, they are dominated by Stephen Moffat. He wrote Blink, he wrote Silence in the Library and Forest of the Dead, he wrote Time Crash, and he wrote Empty Child and Doctor Dances. So he didn't write School Reunion, he didn't write Human Nature, Family of Blood, and he did not write Midnight, which is the only one written by Russell T Davies himself on my list.
I was going to say, by Dom's rules, since you picked Time Crash, you also have to pick Voyage of the Damned.
No, they're 2 different stories.
Just kidding.
So I had a similar circumstance, which is I picked my top 5, and then I looked at who wrote them, and I realized that 4 of my top 5 are all written by Stephen Moffat, which is kind of an interesting indicator of where my interests lie in what I think is the best Doctor Who, or at least New Who. So I would rank them as number 1, Blink. Number 2, Silence in the Library, Forest of the Dead. Number 3 is Midnight, which is that Russell T Davies. The number 4 was Empty Child, Doctor Dances, which is the one from the Christopher Eccleston era. And The Girl in the Fireplace. I always liked that. When I first watched it, I was very affected by the story. And I think this, when you watch it for the first time, not having watched it before, I think it's much more effective than rewatching it. I think the same way with Blink as well, that when you don't know the ending, it's much more effective, or at least it was for me when I watched it. So
I think Blink holds up really well. I use Blink and Midnight as my introductions for people to the series, and every time I watch them with somebody, I love it.
Right. And I think Girl in the Fireplace is best on first watch, not as good on rewatches, but certainly it's in my top 5. But I thought it was very interesting, like you said, Jimmy, like how much of that is dominated by Stephen Moffat, who is really holds so much of everything post 1989. Doctor Who is dominated by Stephen Moffat.
They made a really good choice by making him the next showrunner. If Chris Chibnall had written the best episodes of the Stephen Moffat era, it would have been a good decision to make him showrunner after Stephen Moffat.
Instead, he wrote some of the worst.
And the tough part was choosing 5, because every one that you guys mentioned that I didn't are shows that I would also add, like in a top 10, top 15 list. Yeah. Like I said, Blink and Midnight were 2 shows I purposely did not put on this list because I knew they would be on your guys' list.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and the interesting thing is as we move to our worst 5, I had a surprisingly difficult time filling it with 5 episodes. Now, it was very easy at first, the first couple. But as I got to the end of it, I'm like, these are not terrible. There are aspects of these I enjoyed, but I'll let you guys go again. Jimmy, I'll let you go first this time. What list your bottom 5?
So for my bottom 5, and these are not in any order, and this was a tough thing to do, in part because I don't watch the ones I don't enjoy. So I'm not as familiar, and I'm like, what were all the details of that one? But Aliens of London / World War III with the farty aliens.
Yes.
That just did not enjoy that. Fear Her, the little girl who makes scribbles that attack people. The reintroduction of the Cybermen. I did not like the alternate reality earbud Cybermen. The Shakespeare Code. I typically don't like, and also one that could have been on here is The Unquiet Dead. I don't like the New Who historicals. And in particular, the Shakespeare Code, which promises to have us, Shakespeare is this master of words, which is why he's important to the plot. and only he can come up with the words for the lost play Love's Labor's Won, which is a real lost play, and he needs to come up with these genius words that are going to send the aliens back to their dimension as the climax of the plot. And then all it is reading coordinates.
Right.
You know, it's just badly written. I also don't like things like The Unquiet Dead, which is their Charles Dickens episode, and The Shakespeare Code, which of course is their Shakespeare episode, because we have such historic figure worship
right
in these. Also, the Agatha Christie episode is in that same vein. It's like, oh, Agatha Christie is the greatest ever. So those are all ones I could put on this list. The one that I'm most reluctant to put on this list is Love and Monsters. Because Love and Monsters is actually, in my opinion, a good episode until the end. And at the end, it completely falls off a cliff. But most of the episode is actually quite enjoyable. So that's the one that is I'm most hesitant to put on my worst list, even though it's widely regarded as one of the worst episodes ever because of the ending.
Father Cory?
So I'm not hesitant to put Love and Monsters, because if you want to hear my opinion on that, go back and listen to it. Basically, it was 2 against 1. I did not like that episode at all. That's one of my worst. And again, my lists are not in any order either. Fear Her, I also agree with that one. Then I just went the Slitheen, Aliens, London, World War III as one, and then Boomtown also, or the return. You know, apparently we didn't get enough of them in 2-parter. We had to have a 3rd episode with one of them. And then Father's Day was another one that I put on my list.
That was a hard one for me. Father's Day did not make my list, but it almost did. But there were aspects of that I really liked. So that was a tough one. So for mine, no surprise, anyone who's listened to this podcast know that Aliens of London, World War III, and Boomtown were my top 2, period. That's not a surprise. Yeah. Here's a surprise one. Dalek. The reintroduction of the Daleks. Not that I had a problem with the Dalek itself. I really had a problem with the other characters. I found them annoying. I found the American billionaire annoying. I found the premise of the American billionaire and the secret installation. I just find the whole thing that bit annoying. So really, I didn't really enjoy that as much as I should have, because we had the Daleks again. Fear Her was number 4 for me because of the same reasons. It was a very strange episode and it just didn't work for me. And Love and Monsters, which for the same reasons Jimmy said. I had a hard time putting it on there because I liked so much of it, and it went off the rails at the end, and it was not likable. Even, it wasn't so much that, as we talked about in the episode, when we discussed it at length, it wasn't so much that it wasn't the Doctor in it much at all, because the parts of that were good. It's just the ending was so bizarre and bad. So
yeah.
So that's the top 5, bottom 5. And frankly, I'd love to hear from you, the listener, what your top 5, bottom 5 are. So, to either send us an email, we'll give the contact information at the end, or go to the Facebook page or the website and let us know, because I'd love to hear from you what you think of our list and what your lists are. So let's kind of move on to talking about the 10th Doctor in the time we have left, and David Tennant's era as the Doctor, as he ends it with this. We've already talked about the regeneration, the 2-parter, and you can go back and listen to that. But let's talk about the controversy over whether David Tennant really wanted to go. And we talked a little bit before, but just kind of bring it up again. There is some talk that Tennant was involuntarily replaced. What do you buy that, or do you think it was a wrong move to replace him with the switch over to a new showrunner? Should we have when we have a new showrunner, do we have to have a new Doctor? What do you think?
No. Well, during Classic Who, that was not the case. I think, I'm trying to remember, but I think during Tom Baker's run, there was
they changed
3 or
several
4
times.
showrunners. Yeah, I mean, there was a number of them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think for New Who, it's actually worked fairly well. And there were rumors at the time that David Tennant was kind of getting worn out with the character and everything. And to be honest with you, looking back through New Who, I think they made the changeover at the right time, because where would they have taken him from where he was at? He was already Time Lord victorious and everything and all this stuff. And then, would they have boosted the ego more? Would they had popped that bubble, and that might not have been a good thing to then show David Tennant kind of sliding down from the Time Lord victorious bubble. So, I mean, whether or not he wanted to go, and like I said, at the time, the rumor was that he was ready to go too. He was ready to move on with his career, which he has done quite successfully, by the way. He's been one of the few Doctor Who leads that really had a very successful career after Doctor Who. So,
what do you think, Jimmy?
I tend not to pay a lot of attention to rumors like this because the false to true ratio is so high. Unless Tennant or Davies said something to indicate this, I would say no. What they said in the interviews is most likely true, because Tennant did express an interest in moving on, and that is a real concern for actors. You don't want to be typecast, and you do have to leave at a certain point if you want a career after a popular show. So I don't have any reason to think that he was let go. I think it's up to the showrunner. Do they need a new doctor at a given moment? And if a showrunner wants to keep on a doctor, I think that's fine. If a showrunner thinks, no, it's time for a new one, I think that's the showrunner's call. I also think that if David Tennant had not wanted to go, they wouldn't have given him the exit line they did, which is, right, I don't want to go.
Right.
That would be too on the nose if you had an actor who you're going to have stories told about that by the actor for years afterwards, if that's true.
That's right. That's right. I could see that. We briefly alluded to the influence that David Tennant has on new Who doctors. What do you think of that? Like, did he set more of the tone of who the Doctor is in a modern sense than, I mean, certainly more than Eccleston? I think his influence is enduring, right?
Well, just because of time, just because of the amount of time that he spent in the role, and because he was so popular.
Yeah.
And I mean, and to be fair, of course, Matt Smith was compared to him, and so was Capaldi and now Jodie Whittaker, but they're still different characters. They're still different ways of playing the Doctor, even if they might pull off of what David Tennant did. But again, we talked about David Tennant. He pulled off of the second and fifth Doctor in many ways. So
yeah, every Doctor is a reaction to the previous Doctor, and is inevitably compared to certain seminal Doctors. In the classic era, the first seminal really the one that everyone was after Hartnell was comparing them to, after Hartnell and Troughton, everyone was comparing themselves to Troughton. How does my character compare to Troughton? Because Troughton was the one that saved the show. And then when Tom Baker went on for so long and was so popular, he became another kind of point of reference Doctor. How does my character compare to Tom Baker? In the new era, it's Tennant that is the one that has like the point of reference Doctor. So everyone compares themselves to whoever came just before them and to David Tennant.
Right. I mean, he was the Doctor for more episodes than anyone else. 40, I think it's like 46 or something like that episodes. Nobody has done as many as he has in the modern era. To be clarified there. So he had more time to sort of set the understanding of who the Doctor is, and the story, the background, the arc, the his relationship to the other Time Lords at this time, and Time Lord Victorious, and how he relates to companions, really gets set in many ways by Tennant. And then in comparison, how does Matt Smith relate to them? How does Capaldi relate to them? Those are sort of set in comparison or contrast to how Tennant did it.
Well, there's also kind of a truism among fans where, your first Doctor is your favorite for many people.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of fans who came in with New Who where David Tennant was the first Doctor. They didn't see the Eccleston episodes until maybe later. Like they didn't come in during that first season. And of course, going back then to Classic Who and everything. And so I think there's a lot of people from a fan standpoint, they see him as, the modern Doctor because he was their first Doctor.
Right. Let's talk about the influence of the 10th Doctor on the 11th, 12th, and 13th, and perhaps into the future. Maybe whoever succeeds Jodie Whittaker in the role. What do you think is the most enduring influence on each of those? Like on Matt Smith, we talked about Matt Smith had some of the zany madcap runabout to him, right?
Matt Smith is also a doctor from the Your Good Boyfriend model, but he's zanier.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, he's like David Tennant plus Daffy Duck.
Right. How about with Capaldi though? Is there an influence there in the?
He's the anti-David Tennant.
Yeah.
They're deliberately trying to go to the other extreme from Your Good Boyfriend. I mean,
it's true. I mean, there's very much that response to the Your Good Boyfriend, being against the boyfriend. But the darker side of David Tennant that we saw, later on, like we talked about, Waters of Mars and things like that, where you see how more the darker side of this character.
Right. And
I think Capaldi tried to pull more of that aspect.
That's true. And then with Jodie, I think we're going back to Doctor as part of the fam, the companions, the friends. Let's have fun traveling together. That aspect of the 10th Doctor.
That's actually more Matt Smith having a fam on the TARDIS.
Yeah, Amy and Rory. Yep.
Yeah, and River.
Yes.
I think that to the extent Jodie Whittaker is modeling her performance after Tennant, it's mostly in terms of just trying to be generally likable. And she has little elements of zaniness and anger that poke out, but I think she's just going for likability. And this is not a slight on the actress, but I just don't think she's written in a way that's half as compelling as David Tennant. Mm-hmm. And I think, though, that Jodie Whittaker, because she's the first female doctor, is now a new point of reference doctor for the future, for future female actresses who play the doctor. They're going to be comparing themselves to Jodie Whittaker the same way male actors have been comparing themselves to David Tennant and Patrick Troughton.
That brings up the related point, which is when Jodie Whittaker's time ends in a couple seasons, say maybe she does 3 or 4 seasons, what will people still look to David Tennant as a reference doctor? This is the sort of the archetype of the Doctor in the modern era, or will that have shifted?
I think so. I mean, we've been talking about comparing all the way back to Patrick Troughton in the 60s, so 60s and early 70s. So I mean, we're still talking about Doctor Who going all the way back. Does now, of course, again, we're talking too. That's the funny part to reflect on, but we're talking about episodes that aired as long as 14 years ago.
Right.
And as time goes on, they're going to be as distant as, some of the 60s and the 70s episodes are. And so those doctors they're not going to be remembered as well as more recent ones.
Right. I think that probably, do you have any further comments on either the 10th Doctor or Russell T Davies? Anything left you want to, that's been unsaid? I think it's been a good conversation that we've had on the 10th Doctor and on Russell T Davies. I think that should wrap it up for us. So let's take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Doctor Who, including Mark R., Bo H., Rochelle K., and Familia Napuri. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. And we'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edits the show for us every week. That's it from us. So what do you think of the Russell T Davies era and the 10th Doctor's place in all of modern and classic Who? You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/Doctor Who or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page, or you can send an email to drwho@sqpn.com. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the second Doctor story, the Macra Terror. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me in sharing the Secrets of Doctor Who.
Well, thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Thanks, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest. And remember, allons-y!
Right. This is going to be fun.